My name is Arkotong Longkumer. I'm currently senior lecturer in modern Asia at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. So I have been there since 2011 in a full-time basis. My previous work looked at the Heraka Movement in currently in Dima Hasao in Assam, and so it was published as Reform Identity and Narratives of Belonging, and the Indian edition was published as the Poetry of Resistance. So that work involved primarily kind of ethnographic methods. I'm trained as an anthropologist, so I spend a lot of time in the villages trying to understand this particular movement from the ground up. And this movement is also associated with Rani Gaidinlu, who is an important personality in Naga society. So a lot of my work was trying to understand what this movement is. Who are the key players? What sort of practices did they engage in? And also looking at the historical kind of background of this movement. And I think it was the first kind of sociological study of this movement. Once I finished that project, I did a couple of things. I was interested in, say, material things. So I was interested in things like wood carving, say, for instance. And I did a small project with an artist called Lipton Jamir in Morung Express village in the Ao area, where he constructed these elaborate carvings. So I was trying to understand the themes of the carvings and what they were about. So these projects were happening on the background. I'm generally interested in, of course, anything to do with culture, kind of anything to do with politics, anything to do with religion in the Naga context. So it was around this time that I started to work on my next book, which is the Greater India Experiment, Hindutva and the Northeast. And that project came out primarily with my interaction in the villages with, a lot of these Hindu right workers in Assam, where I was doing my PhD at. And these people came from all over India to start up schools and to help in, say, village schools, to try and educate the poor, Naga villagers, in Assam, in the NC Hills, or Dima Hasao, as it's called now. So interacting with these different workers made me realize that actually their activities are important, and we should try and understand them. We should try and kind of study that. So I began work with the Hindu right. So I worked with a lot of grassroots activists, from the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, people who work for the Kalyan Ashram. In Arunachal, I did some work with Vivekananda Kendra Vidalayas. So what sort of activities are we talking about? These people are primarily interested, or they're committed actually, to help the region become a part of India. Not just geographically, but also culturally, kind of emotionally. And their whole notion is that we have this singular identity called Hindutva, which is Hinduness. And how do we bring that to a region that has got multiple identities, and have got different allegiances, different affiliations, different nationalisms, different religions, all of that, right? So how do you bring a very singular idea to a complex, to a very diverse and complex region with so many identities? So doing that work was quite interesting. I spent a lot of time, and eventually the book was out in 2020 during the pandemic, and it was looking at this idea of the Greater India, the Greater India Experiment. And their notion is that, if you are to think about Greater India, so Greater India is not only India, but also includes parts of Tibet, Malaysia, Thailand, Burma, and so on, right? So if you are to think geographically about all of these areas, then where is the center? Okay, of all of these activities, and the center is the Northeast. So, I mean, that's why part of the argument was that the Greater India experiment looks at the Northeast region as the center, of their kind of civilizational kind of identity. So that was what I did, and since then I've been still active in that. I still write pieces, I still kind of engage in public talks kind of around that. But now I have tried to, now I'm doing something else. So I'm looking at the idea of media and how that is influencing personalities like Guru Meshengwa. So I'm looking at music, of course, which is one element. So I'm trying to look more at the kind of everydayness of media and how it interacts with, say, music or other elements. So that is my current project right now. No, I think the Heraka have always been torn, I think, between in all of these practices. And the influences, of course, are strong. I mean, Christian influences are also there. I mean, Hindu influences are also there. So I think they are trying to be quite strategic, in the middle. So it's not to say that they're becoming completely Hinduized or they're becoming completely Christianized, on the other spectrum. But I think what they're doing is that they are effectively borrowing elements from different traditions to keep their practices alive, and also giving it a particular twist that actually makes the Heraka what they are. Sometimes we think about when people take something from a particular culture and they think that because you are taking that, you are becoming like them. But I don't think that's the case. I think they are taking some elements of it, but they're also reinterpreting that into their own context. So that is the effectiveness of the Heraka movement, I think, because they are taking elements, but they're also re-indigenizing it in their context. Now, there has been a lot written about the Heraka and the Hindu rite, of course. That's something that we can't ignore. Now, yes, the Hindu rite have been involved in opening schools, say for instance, in having cultural affiliations, cultural exchanges and all of that. But I suspect that their involvement could be also quite instrumental. So the Heraka are seeing their involvement as an opportunity to get resources, to get funding, to send the children to school. Okay, because all of this is, it's important, right? If you don't educate your children, then you can't compete with, other groups out there. And the Christians, of course, are quite active in that, right? They've opened a lot of schools. They are really engaged in the kind of social capital that education brings. So the Heraka are also taking advantage of that, and I think they should. So that does not mean that they are becoming Hinduized. I think it means that they are in partnership with different organizations and are using them strategically. Now, even amongst the Heraka, not everybody will say that they're Hindu or they're becoming Hinduized. I think people are very proud of their tradition and culture, and they want to maintain that and to maintain the unique and distinct identity of being a Heraka. So I think that is also important to appreciate without being consumed by say different reports or news about, oh, the Heraka, they're all Hinduized, right? So I think we should also resist that, I think. Maybe poverty is not the right word. I think people are not poor culturally, and people are not poor kind of agriculturally, say for instance, right? People are able to sustain their livelihoods perfectly, and people are content. But I think we also have to acknowledge that, with like modernity comes different facets of kind of influences, right? From the internet to television, to social media, to phones, and all the technological advances are there. And I think one of the things why the Heraka movement has been quite strong in that part of Assam, like Naga areas, is that the technological infrastructures came very late. When I visited them in 2020, kind of electricity had just come to some of the villages. I mean, it's so surprising, right? You would think that by 2022, people are connected, have internet and say like Wi-Fi and like phones and all of that. But it was quite surprising that, it came that late. And I think maybe because of that, one of the reasons is that their culture was still very much based around the agricultural cycle, of dooming, of planting, of sowing. And in that sense, of course, they are tied quite closely to like nature. So culturally, they're rich, but I think with the outside influences, particularly with education, I see this come up over and over again in my conversations with a lot of my friends, with a lot of the like families there, it's like, how do we get cash to kind of invest in our children and to give them a fair chance as well, like kind of any one of us, right? So I think in that sense, maybe the infrastructural support given by the Hindu right or the Catholic Church or the Baptist like missions are quite attractive. Now, does it mean that all of them just join these schools and convert? No, I don't think that's the case. I think there is a kind of element of toing and froing. Yes, some people are attracted and some people become Baptists or Catholics or kind of align themselves with the Hindu right. But I think these are again tools and infrastructures which people use it quite strategically to their advantage, I think. And I think in that sense, it's it's a story about will, and it's a story about agency of these people. It's a difficult question to answer because partly I think the future is uncertain. Partly I think the future is also rich with different possibilities. But I think just looking at the way things are going, I think, someone who is a student of like Naga culture and has done a lot of work around these issues, I mean, I suspect the answer is somewhere in the middle. So it's not complete Hinduization or complete, I don't know, whatever it is, right? I mean, whatever, or complete like modernization where people forget everything about their tradition, they forget their languages, and we try and ape like Western culture to such an extent that we become like them. So I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. I think cultures always come together. There's always a point of encounters, right? I mean, like civilization has been like that. I mean, if it wasn't, then I think no culture exists in isolation. It's always kind of interacting with something. So I think in that sense, I think Naga culture, I think, is still vibrant, I think. And I think it may not be like it was, say, like 100 years ago. But I think every culture will evolve. And I think Naga culture is evolving. And I think there are different moments in which that evolution will have, a jump. And I suspect that evolution happened, I think, at one point, or that jump happened, at one point, maybe in the 70s and 80s, or like 90s, like definitely, with this whole globalization, right? And I think in the 2000s as well, I think it has jumped a bit, especially with the technological advances. I mean, social media is such a big influence, right? So Instagram and all of that. But one of the good things about social media is that, you know, it does really allow entrepreneurs, you know, like Naga entrepreneurs, to also showcase their talents, their identities. You know, I've been talking about people like Guru Mashengwa, say, for instance. Now, so, I mean, he's a person who combines the traditional folk with, say, influences from Bob Dylan and you know, blues and all of that, right? So through that, he's also trying to maintain a particular kind of Naga culture that blends all of this. Where there is handloom, you know, it's, I mean, like, kind of Instagram is replete with, you know, all these innovations happening, right? And food, I mean, is another element in Instagram. I mean, like, people are innovating with different kinds of foods now. They're combining this with that, and, you know, they're selling that, and people are being quite successful. So I think on the whole, that kind of innovation is good. And I think, you know, like, Nagas are inborn kind of innovators, I think, you know, because we're constantly looking for ways to improve certain aspects. So I think the future will be challenging, like, no doubt. The spread of different political ideologies are there through the, like, BJP and RSS and all of that. And that's a, like, reality in India. I mean, like, you know, Hindutva is here to stay. I mean, it's not going anywhere. It's part and parcel of what India is also, right? Kind of India is also evolved. And with that, we also confront, you know, like, new ideologies. And so what will happen in the future is difficult to say, but I think one of the things that I hope the, like, Nagas will kind of embrace is the fact that they have a rich cultural identity, a rich pool of knowledge, and a wonderful ecology right around us that hopefully we can make use of that without really sacrificing that, right? I mean, yes, I mean, let's kind of accommodate, let's innovate, but let's also keep the core principles or the core ideas of who we are intact. And I think that will carry us, like, forward. So I think fusion is quite interesting, isn't it? Because it has the ability to bring together different forms. And in this context, of course, I've been exploring how folk music, and the term folk is also quite tricky, isn't it? I mean, some people associate it with a particular kind of timeless past. But here I'm using folk primarily because, you know, a lot of the artists also like, use the term folk, kind of in that sense of say, like, tradition. So the traditional music, I think, has been blended with certain aspects of, say, like, Western music. So, say, like, Dylan or, like, Marley or Eric Clapton or, you know, whatever. And I think that is a choice made by the individuals to fuse particular elements. But rap, definitely, I've also heard kind of indigenous rap in, say, like, Tripura, say, for instance. What's his name? Like, BK Ronkol has done quite good stuff with rap and, you know, traditional, like, music and, you know, all of that. Yeah, and I think, you know, there are different kinds of genres out there that, you know, you can play with. I mean, even Hindi music is there. So, I mean, Guru Mashengwa, you know, one of the examples is the song, like, Basti Ki Masti. So, whereby, you know, he's blending the traditional chants with kind of Hindi, like, lyrics, but also playing very, like, Western instruments. So, I mean, all of these blendings, I think, you know, are quite interesting. And of course, the, say, Tetso sisters also there. There are also others. I mean, all of these people are trying to repackage folk music, which will be palatable to us, right? Because if you are to, say, like, listen to traditional folk music, I mean, it does require a lot of patience, and you have to be committed. But once you add a bit of, say, like Metallica, or rap, or and it becomes interesting, right? And so I think that's a definite avenue that that should be explored, I think. So I mean, there's no harm in that. If you look at jazz or blues, or all of these kind of early like musical forms that came from the kind of American South, it's a fusion of different cultural kind of influences that give rise to this new form called blues or jazz. So I think we should not be afraid to experiment.